Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the podcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell, going to be your host this evening for the podcast. We've been at the Tri-State Nutrition Conference this week, and this is our 10th podcast and final podcast. So we saved the best for last. This one's titled, What We Have Learned with Feeding and Automatic Milking Systems and Opportunities for Advancements in the Future. And that's with Dr. Samuel Fessenden from AMTS. Samuel, welcome. Looking forward to the conversation here. Before we get started into the conversation, would you mind just kind of giving us an overview of your background and what you do for AMTS?
Yeah, sure. My background is I grew up on a dairy in central New York, and then did my education in a variety of places at Cornell University, and then also came out to University of Minnesota, to work with Dr. Marshall Stern out there. And then after graduating from my PhD, which was primarily in the CNCPS development, I then joined AMTS, since that was in 2016, and spent a few years bouncing around North America and Europe and a few other parts of the world, kind of helping people understand how to use the model and really kind of refine their approach to nutrition management on farms. So did that up until 2020, and then decided to kind of take a little bit of a change of course, and my wife and I started up a robot dairy in southeast Minnesota, and so we farm with her parents there, milking right now about 135 cows on two Lely A5 robots. And I still do some occasional work for AMTS on the side as I can fit it in. So
okay, good.
Yeah.
Overcrowding the robot. Bad Sam. Bad Sam.
I should have dried off a few cows before I left. That's what I got going on. So.
And we're listening to my co-host for this session, Dr. Tom Tylutki. Tom, welcome. You're an expert at the pub. This is at least your second time.
Expert at the pub. I like that.
Why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Sort of like Sam, grew up on a 60-cow farm in eastern New York, ended up going to Cornell, bachelor's, master's, then went into extension for a few years. Went back for my PhD, stayed there a few years working on the model, and 2005, three of us spun out with a license to commercialize it. And since then, we went from 3 people with no money, no product, just a big dream, and now we're in 63, 64 countries. I always have to ask Lynn. It's been a blast touching a lot of cows and sheep and goats around the world.
Yeah, awesome. Welcome, glad to have you back.
Thank you.
Got 2 color commentators with me today. The first one's going to be Nate Elzinga. Nate, welcome.
Welcome.
Yep. Give us a little bit of background about yourself.
So I grew up in a dairy in West Michigan. Started young out in the barn. Went kicking and screaming to Michigan State for dairy management. I actually really enjoyed it, but went back to the farm for 10 years. And then it's my 7-year anniversary coming to Caledonia and doing nutrition work for them. So yeah.
Good. Glad to have you here. Looking forward to the conversation. And then we've got Brandon Van Soest. Now, that's a famous name, but I'm imagining that you're not related to the fabled Peter.
Well, it's not been confirmed or denied yet. So.
Okay, I see.
Good answer.
Brandon, would you mind kind of giving us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I traditionally didn't come from a dairy background per se. Family-owned landscape company, actually, and I decided it wasn't for me, and I wanted to go to vet school originally. Went to Purdue for undergrad, animal science, and then decided I wanted to go to grad school. So went to Michigan State under Dr. Vandehar. Looked at some calf stuff there, and then ended up going to University of Guelph for a PhD, working with Dr. Trevor DeVries on robotic milking systems. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had an interesting podcast earlier with a young lady, Anna Schweinke, that was very interesting. Yeah. Sam, you gave a presentation earlier today. Would you kind of give us just kind of a background of some of the key elements that you covered and kind of give us a foundation for our discussion today?
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
Yeah. So when I was approached for doing this talk, I didn't really know exactly how to title it, and it was something that, I was asked to look at what have we learned and what's in the future, and I was like, well, geez, I don't know. I've learned a few things just myself, but there's a lot of people that feed a lot more robot cows than I do, but. I figured I'd take a stab at it and kind of started going through the research side of things and working and talking to different nutritionists to kind of try to get a little bit bigger picture. That's what I kind of did with the talk is talk through, this is what I generally see out there, and then maybe some of the gaps that we have in knowledge and in just, do we need to sort of change our overall approach to feeding cows in an AMS system? That's kind of what I did. Focused a little bit on the robot feed itself, and then a little bit on the PMR formulation, and then kind of a little bit of a look to the future of what we might be able to anticipate coming from formulation programs or from just kind of general thought process of how do we feed cows in a maybe slightly different environment than we're used to with a TMR fed herd.
What do you see as the biggest challenge?
Well, there's a lot of data and a lot of a lot of ways to look at it, and we don't really have a clear idea of what stands out as the most important data. So I think people get lost in the weeds when they're trying to formulate, and they get, I think, a little bit too in their heads with, well, maybe I need to have exactly this pounds or this, whatever metric I want to use. When I think in reality, a lot of it's just letting the cow kind of be the cow and let her, do her thing. So I think I try to take a little more simplistic approach as I'm approaching formulating those herds. So, yeah.
So you mentioned gaps. What are some of the biggest gaps you've seen?
Well, so like what I see from, especially on translating, I'll say robot research into some of the actual on-farm use or on-farm formulation is I think some people try to get a little bit too into understanding, if I feed X amount more pellet or robot feed, what happens to PMR intake? And, there's a lot of studies that focus on that substitution ratio. And if you look at some of the more recent reviews, it's all over the board, right? We have substitution ratios that go from, let's say, 0.5 to 1.5. So when you are trying to approach it using those sort of ratios, or even just the ratio of energy in the PMR versus the robot feed, you're kind of looking at, I'd say, maybe the wrong numbers. I think we're focusing too much on these metrics that are so highly integrated. Cow behavior and intake behavior is such a highly integrated outcome, and trying to model or predict that from a formulation standpoint is almost an impossible task. And so that gap there, I think, is one of the largest ones that I see where people kind of get wrapped up in some of these ratios, but really we just need to kind of go back to basics and say, hey, I just got to formulate a good PMR, a good rumen-friendly PMR, and then work on a good palatable feed that gets the cows into the robot.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where I see some of the gaps.
Yeah. So you gentlemen work with robotic dairies? Yeah. So what's some of the things, some gaps that you guys have seen?
So I'd be curious if in a scenario where you have basically corn silage to work with, and it's a high starch corn silage, how do you formulate a PMR to drive visits, to drive cows to the robot?
Yeah, so like in my situation, what I do on my dairy myself is I feed a fairly high corn silage diet. I think we're around 24 pounds of corn silage dry matter per cow. And so, yeah, and not a lot of haylage, just given agronomics and what makes sense to grow on my land. I tend to have a fairly heavy corn silage PMR. My robot feed is ground corn, just ground corn being fed through the robots, and then I do have a gluten pellet coming in to kind of help basically provide some feed to those later lactation cows and be able to get a little bit more feed into them that way. So in my case, if I look at my total robot feed, especially for some of those high producing cows, it's a fairly high energy, setup because it is just straight ground corn. And so I think if we start to look at the difference between the PMR energy content and the pellet energy content, maybe I'm kind of ending up in that situation where I don't have to worry too much about high starch load in my PMR. I've still got that energy drive for the pellets in the robot or the robot feed. Yeah. So
It's kind of interesting if I can jump in there. Talking to some nutritionists in Canada that feed a lot of robot cows, they've kind of done this break point of if the herd's doing less than 35, 37 liters, so yeah, less than 80 pounds, then they'll start with that PMR being 80% of the energy level of but as they get herds going 40 up, so 90 pounds up, they're actually bringing that closer to where in some of the cases they're over 90% of the energy coming from the PMR, and they aren't seeing that this drop in visits or anything. She's just got the demand to go get milked.
It's like the chicken or the egg thing. Like, as I've noticed that too. I've got one herd that's a real high producing herd, and I can get away with murder on the PMR. I can have, it's basically like a TMR for most other herds, and we're feeding a ground meal through the robot and limited amounts of it, but I'm getting the visits and the production's there, and it's not a factor. But I think you're right. I think as that production level goes down, it's like you need to drive the production, you need the visits to do it, but what do you do first?
Yeah, I think what I see, and I don't necessarily have this problem in my herd or in some of these, let's say, higher producing herds, is you get those late stale cows or the lazy cows, that sort of thing. And I don't really see that. I at the end of the day, a late lactation cow, I don't really care if she's only getting milked, maybe even less than 2 times a day, right? Because at the end of the day, she doesn't have a lot of milk that she's coming in at each visit. But as long as I kind of am doing a good job with my transition process and lameness and keeping those cows, in good shape through the whole lactation, I don't end up with these really late days in milk or even long days in milk animals. So I kind of wonder on maybe those lower producing herds if maybe we're just looking at maybe there's some repro issues or some transition cow issues.
I think the repro issues is a big one because what's your calving interval?
Right. So for us, I mean, we're right around that 13 months calving interval.
Yeah, and that's probably, I think, starting to push it in terms of maybe running into some issues with some of those lazy cows.
Yeah, and like for us, I don't really seem to have those lazy cows.
Yeah.
But I think in situations where maybe it's just not a higher level of production in the herd, that you end up having cows that are just kind of camping out at 70 to 80 pounds for a long part of their lactation, and they're not really coming into the robot. They don't have that drive to be coming into the robot to eat and to get that energy.
So you have 2 feeds going in your system. How do you manage that throughout lactation?
Yeah. So right now, there's 2 ways I do it. One is if I'm quick and just trying to get it done, and that's where I basically go through and I say, I've got corn and gluten pellets, and so I essentially start off at a ratio for those high cows, or fresh to high cows. I sort of ramp them up to a ratio of almost 70 to 30 corn to gluten. And then over the lactation, I'll back that down to the point where I get to a late lactation cow being at probably about 40 to 60 corn to gluten, or even, on much lower than that, I'll just be giving them kind of like token amounts of ground corn just to make them think they're getting something sweet. So, so that kind of gives me that ability to really change what they're seeing at the robot and not, feeding too much energy to those late lactation cows. Yeah.
How'd you end up just doing the gluten pellets?
Meaning when we made the switch over? Or
Why?
Why? Well, so the reason I have gluten pellets in there still, I guess, is because of just bulk density. I mean, if I want to be pushing, because I typically like to be somewhere between 10 to 12 pounds of robot feed per 100 pounds of milk. And so if I am, trying to get that much feed into a high producing cow and I'm feeding it with ground corn, especially that high producing cow is getting quite a bit more ground corn than gluten pellets. I still need something to help bring in a little bit of more feed in a denser form, and so that bulk
but I
density
guess I was
helps.
going in a slightly different way. You go to a lot of places, they'll have these fancy
Custom pellets.
custom pellets and like that.
Well, for me, it was cost. I didn't really want to pay for a custom
And
pellet.
Did you see any difference when you went from the
No,
custom
no,
pellets
not
to-
really. I mean, we went from because we started the dairy in fall of 2020, and we fed a custom pellet to start off, just because I didn't really want to rock the ship too much. I was still in the learning process. I mean, I'm always still in the learning process. But we went to the custom pellet and had some outside help to kind of help formulate that. But then, it just kind of got to the point where I'm like, man, I raise my own corn on the farm. I have extra corn that I sell, and yet I'm still buying or at least grain banking and bringing corn in the pellet and having to have someone else touch it. So, I'm losing some basically money in that process. And so, yeah, that's where I just said if I can use my own corn on farm, then that's going to be a good cost savings. At the time, it was probably about 85 cents a head per day. So I could spend a lot to figure out how to make this work. And yeah, so we did that, and honestly, what I first saw, without changing much, and we were at a pretty stable point when I changed over, so I could kind of watch my numbers. I didn't really change much on milk access or anything, so when we switched over, and maybe it was just the feed switch itself, but I had kind of an increase in refusals, so I had cows that were more interested in coming into the robot anyway. They just didn't have milking permissions to allow it at that time. And yeah, milk production stayed pretty steady, and components actually slowly started to come up as I was able to tailor that energy levels for those high producing cows. So yeah, it was definitely a good switch for us to go to that ground feed side. I've been slowly reducing overall gluten pellets since then, just to see what I can do, and it's working so far. So yeah.
When you swapped from the robot pellet, did you go down in feed, or did you stay same on how much you fed through the robot?
When I swapped, it was pretty much about the same. I was trying to target that same kind of level, just on a pounds per 100 pounds of milk. But yeah, beyond that, I've been slowly reducing it just to kind of see what I can do. But I don't really have an incentive to reduce down to like 8 or 6. What you kind of see maybe even towards more of the guided flow type traffic systems, just because it's not like I have the extra cost of a custom pellet that I'm trying to offset. If I'm going to take corn out of the robot, it's just going to go into the PMR. So that's, I don't necessarily feel like I need to be feeding a lower amount of robot feed from a financial standpoint. So.
You're not going to try like some of the people are doing with the guided flows of not feeding any pellets in the robot?
Not at my farm, no.
Scott, you'd asked about gaps. I think the one gap in the U.S. we're seeing a lot is not having the access to 2 feed types. I think a lot of new systems going in only have one, so we're kind of stuck feeding more of the same thing or less of the same thing. And I think that's kind of cool to have the 2 feed types. And I think you talked about the Canadian market. When I was up there in Guelph, we ran into a lot of farms up there. I would say, I don't know if it was 40 or 60% farms that had at least 2, if not more, 3, 4 feed types. If that was a liquid, if that was 2 pellets, if that was a fresh feed or something like that, so that they could target, lower feeding amounts overall, but still target those fresh cows, high cows, but also not overfeed the late cows with a high starch like you're doing with the gluten. Yeah. And it saves cost too, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have a more expensive pellet or feed that you're going to feed the fresh cows or feed the high cows. But then your lower lactating animals that don't need it much, but you're still going to be able to give them enough to incentivize them to come in instead of just trickling a little bit in there or having to affect your PMR so much that you're now balancing it too low.
It's almost like we're going back to good old component feeding.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you traveled a bit in your early career. Did that also include Europe? And if so, right, they do a lot of robot feeding over there, a lot of pellets. But it seems like, I could be wrong, but they're putting a lot more nutrition through those feeders than just carbohydrate. Would that be a fair assessment?
I'd say probably generally there's a lot of differences in the programs over there in terms of what sort of feeds are on farm, what sort of feeds they have access to. A lot less soya and a lot more rapeseed, just given different regulations over there. When I was over there, I was traveling quite a bit in continental Europe, and then even a little bit in Ireland and England a little bit as well. Going around Germany and the Netherlands, lots of robot herds, and a lot of them feeding a custom pellet. But what's interesting is a lot of them are it's not like a tailored pellet. I say custom pellet. The mill is going to carry 1 or 2 or maybe 3 robot pellets, and all the robot farms are going to get the same formulation. And so you see a little bit less kind of customization in that way. What's interesting is some places also feeding a lot like palm kernel, which is not a very palatable feed.
Oh, palm kernel. Well,
Yeah,
and it's cheap.
and it's cheap. So basically just
Completely
trying to
indigestible
yeah.
bedding.
So it just was just interesting seeing that difference there. But they are pushing more total pounds through the robot. In some instances, some places are not. But it was kind of good for me to see that because I kind of understand. Okay, this is why they're all mostly on pellets over there and very few non-pelleted feeds, and that's right how the systems were built, right? So
It's
deal
not
well
even
and
just how the systems were built. It's really just a difference in the industry.
yeah,
In
they
the overall industry,
yeah
they are still much more reliant upon the more traditional feed mill relationship
yeah
versus U.S. and Canada, where it's so much driven by consultants or, what farms and consultants have done to the feed industry of decoupling everything.
yeah
It's just wildly different than
yeah
North America.
yeah, and like in North America, you'd be rare to see a I'll say custom formulated pellet in the PMR or in the TMR, but in Europe you'll see that. You'll see a protein,
Yeah, everything's
protein pelleted.
Yep.
It's actually a frustration for us, right? So
Yeah.
Balchem's in the rumen-protected nutrient
Yep.
business, and those are lipid encapsulates.
Yeah, you're screwed with.
They don't last in pellets,
No.
and they are bound and determined to put it in the pellet.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And I can't get them to put it in the PMR, and so I don't know. It's just kind of cultural.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, and the feed companies, right? They want to put it in the pellet because they want to sell more pellets.
Yeah. Some more pellets, easier to move pellets, all that.
I'll make no additional comments about pellets.
Well, and there's a
Pellets
chance
can be great.
less shrink, right? If it's in a pellet form, it's not blown away. It
Yeah, true.
potentially could be more consistent if the pelleting and mill does well. Good job. But
If
again,
it's a good pellet.
yeah,
Yeah.
mill dependent, but that I know is a thing. I know University of Guelph uses a pellet as their mineral mix, and I think that was kind of the reason why, just handling and
Yeah.
put it in a bin and
The
you just-
pelleted mineral products are flipping awesome. One of our customers, actually, they're a distributor in Argentina. They do a lot of pelleted minerals, and it is just truly. I wish, if anything, that would be really cool to have in the U.S. because that handling and shrink is just way much easier.
So you mentioned feeding palm kernel over in Europe. One of the things that I plan on toying with here in the future, high oleic soybeans through the robot, in combination with something like corn. You guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've got some farms around us in southeast Minnesota doing that. Using some of those high lake beans. And they say the cows love it. It works really well. Mix it in with corn, and grind it, or even more, a larger particle size.
Yeah, I'd
And
still grind it because you want to.
for how it flows out of the feeders, that's I think trying to find a happy medium there to make sure you're not getting
Quarters
too much.
at least.
Yeah,
That'll
but
still flow.
Yeah. But if you have a lot of fines in there too, if it bridges up, and that's the biggest struggle with ground feed and a lot of the robot feeders is
Not
Yeah.
my problem.
but it is my problem.
It is.
Nate, why would you do that instead of putting it in a PMR?
Well, then you could control dose over lactation, and cut the starch. Hopefully it's palatable enough that it's a help to, draw cows to the robot too at the same time.
Oh well, roasted beans.
Yeah,
especially
I
if it's
love
roasted.
beans.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've done some stuff with high oleic beans with a bypass plant in New York. Those high oleic beans are flipping cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some several farms putting it in the robot. It's one of those things that allows the farmer, if they're growing it on farm, to make an on-farm grain mix, and that's something, we're totally fine with. Taking it off the plate of taking pellet out, but yeah, we've done that where we're mixing it with on-farm grain, and they just kind of make that and put it up in their bin.
Yeah.
So it's worked well.
Yeah, good. So you said there's some things that you're going to talk about what we need to change, and maybe we've touched on some of those, but kind of give me an idea of some of the things that you talked about in your presentation.
Yeah, I think, kind of looking towards the future, if you talk with most nutritionists, they're almost always going to be balancing on a group of cows. Sometimes, even just taking them out the robot side, you're talking about a PMR a TMR that's fed to, sometimes it's a single group, for all milking cows get the same TMR, or if we're talking high and low groups or whatever types of splits you might have. We are always using our ration balancing programs on averages of cows or groups or herd averages or one standard deviation above if you're kind of doing the lead feeding style. All those methods are kind of the predominant method that's out there. As we move more and more towards the use of this technology and kind of get towards what people would call precision feeding, can we be targeting at least maybe smaller groups of cows and maybe getting down to individual cow ration balancing? And I think quite a bit of that's on kind of putting on my AMTS hat, us, making the infrastructure to be able to allow a nutritionist to efficiently work and get that done. And so that's what I kind of see as, you know, can we take more of like a lactation approach where we're balancing for all cows simultaneously? You know, maybe we are balancing for all groups, you know, in a big picture, you know, kind of changing the way that people think about balancing, you know, for an individual group or that sort of
Well,
thing.
just here's a great example. Looking at some of this stuff over the years, when we balance for the average of a group, okay, or okay, we'll throw a lead factor on there so that we're 10% above average or whatever number you want. When you actually look at the individual population within that group, and I don't care if it's the high group or if you group by age, whatever, the assumption is that that group is following a normal distribution. And when you dig into it, I think in all the valuations I've done, I may have seen one pen that followed a normal distribution. Most of the time, we're dealing with a bimodal or even a trimodal population. So we've got these 2 or 3 subpopulations, and we're trying to shoot for one of them. And it could actually be where we've got this population that's way to the extremes, and what we're balancing for doesn't really exist. So the kind of the approach that we're working on is to be able to look at this with the individual animals, and you know, the simplest form, even if we didn't get to the individual animal basis, we could identify those subpopulations, and actually we may be formulating, okay, we're going to formulate for this group, but behind the scenes we're actually evaluating it and formulating it for 2 or 3 subpopulations, so we can get a better overall picture of what those animals are going to do. It's pretty wild as I've dug into this, what we can do. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I think as you look at even individual cows, you know, not that we're necessarily ready to balance on an individual basis, but if you start looking at like lactation curves of individual cows, I mean, we all can picture a standard lactation curve, but you start looking at individuals and you're like, all right, well, this cow, she came up, you know, and she peaked, let's say 140, 150 pounds, and she stayed there for 200 days. She got pregnant in that time. You know, there are cows out there that do that pretty much in every herd. There's those cows that just have this atypical lactation curve. And so if we go ahead and adopt an overall feeding, you know, strategy of saying, okay, yeah, I've got a high cow and a low cow group, let's say just for a TMR type herd, you know, what are you going to do? You're going to have her in a high cow group for a while. And then once she's, you know, checked pregnant or confirmed pregnant, you move her to a low cow group. Well, is she actually a low cow? Maybe not. You know, she might still be producing really quite well. And then you move her onto this low energy ration. And guess what? You make her a low cow. And so
That's a great point, Sam. And we were doing that at a farm I worked with closely for a number of years. We actually grouped more by age. Yeah. And they had daily milk weights, and it was kind of wild. I was watching cows. We would move cows, okay, just normal cow behavior, that whole social reset. They've got to find their place in the pecking order. If they are on the same diet, just that move, they'll come down milk for 3 or 4 days and then come back up. Depending on the social structure, they may end up higher on their lactation curve. If you change diets, though, and this is where I found that, oh man, I'm not changing diets any more than 3 points of forage between groups. If you change that diet 5, 6 points of forage, like a lot of people do, going from high to a low or more, they come down with that social crash, and there's so much more NDF in the diet that they're full, they never come back to that. So we've just clipped those cows, and wow, now we got fat late lactation cows. There you go, folks.
yeah, and that's I think when you kind of translate that into the robot herds, if we look at robot feed tables, you know, kind of end up in sometimes you look at what people put together on their feed tables, and you say, well, there's some traps here, and by traps I mean like where a cow is going to fall off a feed table, or she's not going to be able to really. All of a sudden, she's going to cross over this magic number of 200 or 210 days in milk, gets onto a different part of the feed table, and all of a sudden gets, you know, a bunch of feed pulled away from her when she really actually should be entitled to more because she's still cranking away on milk.
I think you hit a good point there. I think people overcomplicate their feed tables.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they, you know, and this is a big thing in Europe and Japan where they'll have them on a flat feeding basis for 50, 60 days in milk, and then they go on the feed table. And it's like, well, hell, we're already post-peak. What did we do?
Yeah.
Or they just do some really crazy things that just make no sense. They're overcomplicating it.
Yeah. Yep.
So the tool in AMTS for balancing for robot herds, where are we at with that? And like, do you have plans to add more than one robot feed.
Oh,
Yeah, Tom. When's my second feed coming in?
second, hell, we're actually going to go out to 4 feeds.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We're starting to work on that now. We had to do, we're doing with a relationship with Lactanet up in Canada to get the individual animal and do component feeding. That is almost to the point where we're going to give it to them for testing, I think probably next week, hopefully. And then we will get into doing the robot screen. And it's going to be pretty different than, it's going to be very, on one hand, it's going to be very different than what we had in Pro because of the expansion into multiple feeds. And then also some other things that we're going to include in it that I'm not going to say yet till we actually have it operational. It's one of those, let's build the excitement. We're coming out with something flipping cool. Okay, we'll leave it there.
I think our challenge as we're developing these tools, and maybe as you've played with the robot feeding tool in the old program, it's a little bit tricky because we're trying to sort of be able to give people this whole different way of thinking about ration balancing, but we also have a lot of users are very, very used to doing something one way. So when we build out this new part of the program, it's really messy and complicated in the development side of things.
Yeah.
And Tom and I know how to run it, and maybe a few other people.
Very few.
But then we got to figure out how to make it actually usable for nutritionists, and so that you guys aren't just banging your heads against the table saying what is going on here? What are they trying to do?
And that's the hardest part that
hard.
we've run into with development. It's like with nutrition. We've been working on nutrition in the whole new platform for over 6 years. And, one of the people that I think is a hero in the IT world, Steve Jobs. And he was known, you read this in books about him and all this. He took what he called the simple stick to everything that came into the door. Engineers would come in with, a great new product idea. I think it even started with the iPod. Came in and he looks at it and he's like, okay, good functionality, good idea, but it's a piece of crap. It's too complicated. And to make something that's really complex, simple, is really, really hard. In development, we will beat each other up and yell and scream at each other and over the placement of where should this icon be? And then to be consistent in all of those decisions. It's tough. It's so easy to build something. Oh, we're going to add this. It's going to be cool. And pretty soon you got this mess. Oh, wait, that's a certain operating system out of Washington. But that's the issue. It's complex.
So is that why in nutrition, like you scaled all the tabs back to like 1 or 2, and now all of a sudden there's a bunch more? Like you got outvoted?
Yes, absolutely. That was part of the simple test. It was my decision. I'm like, okay, we don't know which ones people use, so let's get rid of them all. And then it's the squeaky wheel, the popular vote. You want one back? Okay, we'll bring it back if there's enough interest in it. And we've done that. And I don't know if we're going to bring back any more because, people be I wish this, and it's like, all right, you're one vote. We got a whole bunch of others. Squeaky wheel, spread the word. You want it? Talk.
So if the one vote squeaks a lot,
no, then I squeak back louder. Get more votes.
Yeah.
Where does CNCPS 7 fit into all this discussions?
Every time Van Amber goes out and gives a talk, and suddenly you see all publications and everything. The phone starts ringing. We hear 7's out, 7's out, 7's out. No, okay. 7's kind of a different story than how the model development has been in the past. Even like with where we are with 656, the introduction of the branch chains, they would give us, like we'll do the branch chains as a great example since we just did that. Here's the equations in a spreadsheet form, okay, so that we could then figure out how to build it in. And as long as the answers we were getting are compliant with what they had in a spreadsheet, all's good to go. 7, since it goes dynamic, and it's a lot more complicated, that they actually have had it coded themselves by a third party, and then we basically are getting a runtime engine of it that we then have to figure out how to communicate with it and build an interface around it. We got the first version of that package middle of last year, and it was like, woo, yeah, your coders only think in the world of web apps. This is unworkable for us. So they had to go back and have a bunch of stuff redone to get it into a form that would actually be workable for several of us license holders. We just got word 2 or 3 weeks ago that we now have access to that package. When we're right in the middle of trying to finish up, as we're rolling out nutrition and finishing up getting the new advanced optimization routines in, that we haven't even started that. And so I don't even know at this point how workable it's going to be. I don't know how long it's going to be. It's going to be a pretty big project because we've got to do all this interface, as well as we don't even know how fast it's going to run. If it's going 5-minute increments over 300 hours, it's going to be a challenge because like now in nutrition, be on a diet, change the feed amount, you get the updated results. Well, now if you hit a number and if it takes any significant amount of time to run through all 400 hours worth of simulations, so we don't even know any of that yet. I'm hoping probably in the next 6-8 weeks, our coding team will start looking at it and trying to figure it out. My guess is if it really is as where it's supposed to be, where we can actually use it, it'll be later this year.
And that'll be probably a little bit more limited in the release to start because we need to kind of understand what sort of anticipated changes we'd see on predictions.
Well, so kind of the plan too is it's not going to wholesale replace 656.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're actually going to do it as an add-on like the advanced optimizer, and it'll be, an evaluation screen to start with because people aren't going to have the data to do all of the calculations. All the slow pull, fast pull, all the, all that off of non-forages. There's going to be some challenges with rolling it out. So, yeah, I see it as a multi-year rollout, actually.
Well, yeah.
What role do you see AI playing in ration balancing software going forward, or what role should it play?
Today,
Nothing. Yeah.
Because all these AI models are...
Well, they're trained differently. They're language models.
They're language models. Yeah, they're an infant.
Yeah.
Ask me that question in 5 years.
It's going to take that long.
Probably not, but I'm hedging. I have ideas. Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But it needs data.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the hard thing. It's not like I know there's a group that's looking at throwing NASM and the NRC and all this literature data at AI to have it try and do something. It's not going to work. It's going to fail. It's going to fail miserably. It's happening here in the U.S. and it's happening in China as well. That's a disaster waiting to happen because there's so much missing data. You go through the literature. Hell, you guys know. Try and find when you start looking at a nutrition paper or let's evaluate a bypass methionine, and they don't even include what the diet was, what the feed composition was in the paper. You're going to feed that to an AI system and expect it to come up with something? It's going to come up with something stupid.
But I think much further down the road, as we refine our relationship with AI, it definitely will become a part of what we do.
Absolutely.
From data management. I mean, not even just ration balancing, but just how do we understand and analyze the data coming out of some of our sensor systems on farms?
That's
I think
what I
that'd
was
be the
going to
first
ask
one
as well.
is how could you use AI in evaluating all the raw data coming out of the robot?
Right.
If you dump all the outputs for AMTS and all the cow data and make this massive data set, then you could do something.
Right.
Really?
And
Like I said, ask me in 3 years. I need the data.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And the bad thing is we just can't pull the data out of the raw data out of the robots or out of the any of the herd management software because a lot of that data is really messy.
Yeah.
So the data validation, the data checks, that gets really tricky as we've been working on that. It's like, oh man, we got to make some tough decisions as to what's acceptable and not.
All my farms are perfect.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah.
Sam, is there anything that we've left uncovered that you presented in your presentation today?
Well, I guess I'd just say, as nutritionists are looking at trying to understand, feeding robots, I think, especially with young nutritionists, there's always a challenge of feeling confident enough to try something. And so you always tend to default back to what's safe. And nutritionists in general, you don't want to lose a client. You don't want to make a mess, make a change that messes up the farm. In a TMR fed herd, okay, yes, you can pretty easily make some big mistakes. But when you make some mistakes in a robot fed herd or a robot herd, right, all of a sudden the cows aren't coming into milk. At least with classical farms, they're getting milk 3 times a day or 2 times a day. So I think there's sometimes a little bit of stress put on, especially those younger nutritionists, to feel confident in what they're doing. Right. My advice would be just go ahead and try it, sort of fake it till you make it type thing. And go ahead and try to do some things that maybe push the boundaries a little bit. I think if you identify those herds that are maybe going to be more willing to work with you, maybe some of the higher producing herds that are going to be able to be a little more forgiving, like we talked about earlier, that's where, that's what we did with our herd was I don't want to feed a custom pellet. I'm going to figure out how to get ground feed through these feeders and get it into the cows. And right, it was a huge cost savings for us. And so, just really don't pen yourself into only feeding a robot pellet. Really try to think outside the box and make something that works for the farm.
Well, I want to add something to that, and it's something that you just inherently do. Okay. And young nutritionists typically don't know this. Just go watch the cows.
Well, yeah.
Watch their behavior. You can tell so much about, even within robots, with what flow is, what's all this, what kind of attracts cows are like that. Watch the cows. We don't train people in grad school or undergrad to be nutritionists, and we never even talk about that type of stuff of watch the cows.
That's something you run into a lot, is like I'll get called in tech support from some farms and some of my colleagues, and they'll be like, I looked over the rations, they look good. What's going on? And my first thing is well, what's changed on the farm? Come wintertime, some guys like to put stuff around the robots to try to keep it a little warm. Well, is this the first year they've done it? There's definitely things that we do that really you don't think anything of it, but it dramatically affects, it's a new situation, new environment. You're putting something up to, block stuff while you're blocking their vision. Like you said, if you sit back and kind of watch cows, how they're interacting within the pen, you can pretty quickly see like, oh yeah, you changed that. We moved to water. We moved whatever, just kind of see, oh, well, we're all clunked up here. Well, that fan's broken. Well, that's why they're all, whatever, I think sometimes we get too hyper-focused on the rations got to be perfect. Well, I think it goes back to feed management. Well, the Juno's been down, or, the feed push-ups haven't been done if it's a manual, or, oh, the mixer wagon is not mixing like it should. It's like, well,
the payloader's broke, so we're using a skid steer to load the mixer, and it takes 3 times as long, so we're not paying attention.
Or the scale's off, the
Scales?
weigh
What
bars.
scales?
Yeah, right. The weigh bar on the mix wagon's off or something. There's a lot of things, like you said, that just get on the farm and just, take a few minutes to, instead of doing a quick walkthrough, hey, let's take a few seconds to kind of visualize things. I think some nutritionists, and I can get caught up in it too, going back to the ration and saying, oh, milk's down, milk's up, visits are down, visits are up, and try to tweak something. And it's like, look at the bigger picture. It's a full system. It's not just what you're feeding. So
yeah, we're trying to balance in these programs to grams of amino acids, right?
Right.
The weight of a piece of paper, and the cow's eating, 60 pounds of dry matter a day.
Oh, right? Even worse. When was the last time you did dry matters?
Right.
Well, yeah, that's still a challenge on farms.
Yeah. One of the favorite things I love to do on farms is, I should carry a lawn chair with me. Just go sit in the feed alley and watch cows eat. I can tell you so much about what's going on in that herd just there.
I've threatened to bring a camper, tow a camper with me and just spend a week.
That's not a bad idea.
Hunting cameras work for those that have kids and need to get home.
Yeah.
But no, the camper's even better because there's no cell signal, no internet, no one can bother you.
Yeah.
Tiny house.
Yep.
Yeah.
One farm a week.
Gentlemen, this has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it, but they flickered the lights, and that means it is last call. And so what we do here at Last Call, what I'd like to do is have each of you to come up with a couple takeaways or a couple key learnings that you had, just something you'd like to share with the audience. And then we'll wrap it up. And I'll start with my co-host down here, Tom, if you want to lead us off.
Tonight's Last Call question is brought to you by NitroSure Precision Release Nitrogen. NitroSure delivers a complete TMR for the rumen microbiome, helping you feed the microbes that feed your cows. To learn more about maximizing microbial protein output while reducing your carbon footprint, visit balchem.com/nitrosure.
Sure, I think it's really important. Again, we got to focus on the cows, no matter what system we got, and I think it's a little bit easier to do it with AMS systems because they tend to be more cow friendly. But we still got to watch the cows. It's still all about the people, and not be afraid. I like the way Sam put it. Don't be afraid to try new things, and really look at the cost side of how we're doing these formulations, and they're really challenging, but the technology will improve to where we can make these things easier to formulate and think about.
Yeah, good. Nate, what'd you like to share with us?
Well, I think this discussion has been helpful for me. I mean, I have all these things that I want to try, and like you say, the confidence to do it, and without screwing things up. But I think that's where the industry has to go. Margins are too tight. We got to be able to feed the individual cows. It takes more than one feeding robot to do that if you want to do it right. So, yeah, for me, this discussion has been a lot of fun, and yeah, focus on the cows. The cows will tell you everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Good comments. Brandon?
Yeah, obviously echo the cows. I mean, you got to be able to watch them. But another thing, we touched on it a bit, but just, not over, focusing on feed tables all too much. You want to make them user friendly. You don't want to hyper focus on, they need to go up, they need to go down. Like you said, don't create traps for them. But I think another thing that we don't look at, and we didn't really talk today about because we're nutrition focused, but milk access. I mean, I think that's another one that I know internally we talk a lot about, and as nutritionists, don't usually get an opportunity to make too many changes on those. But I think sometimes we set up cows up for failure there too. Like you kind of touched on, we got more refusals. Well, it's like, is that a good thing, or are we teaching these cows that they can't go, and now you end up with fetch cows down the road? So but yeah, I think just not overcomplicating some of those settings, but still understanding what's happening so that you can use those as problem-solving situations rather than, I need to go change the ration. I think it's big thing is look at other things other than run back to the ration every time something's going wrong.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. Wise advice. Sam?
Yeah, I think for my couple key takeaways, and the first one I'll borrow from all three other panelists, and I have no problem doing it because I think that should be your focus is on those cows. Just identifying those individual barriers to those cows being the high producers that they can be, and really just taking time to listen to them and look and watch the cows. And then, my second one would be, I'll say maybe a little more futuristic looking. I think there's a lot of really cool things coming on the horizon for how nutritionists can help solve some of those persistent questions that we have on farms. And so, I think if it's from a ration balancing or even just large data analytics, I think, there's some really cool things coming down the road. So, yeah.
Cool. I said it at the top that we saved the best for last. I still think that's true. So you guys did a great job. I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your time and expertise. It's been good. I've really enjoyed it. To our loyal listeners out there, as always, we want to thank you for joining us for yet another episode. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun. And I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.